I'm so glad to be here. Silas, thank you for the invitation to this wonderful event. There are people here that vegan people that are interested in planetary health. There are vegan people that are interested in animal welfare, and there are vegan people that are interested in personal health. And this event, the Vegan Convergence of the Peoples, combines all those together so we can all work together. That is just so amazing. My comments today are going to be really focused on the personal health. Let me say why that is. I'm really glad to be here because I'm so glad to be alive, because I almost died. And as I came to find out, I almost died needlessly. And the question here for everyone is, will you die needlessly? I hope you won't. I hope you live your allotted years on this earth and don't take actions that will bring your life to an end sooner than it needs to be. That is my sincere hope. I'm going to talk to you about heart disease and some other diseases as well. I'm going to talk about health through nutrition, and I'll end with some strategies for success. My story really begins about 20 years ago when my wife turns to me and says, "John, do you know that you have the body of a god?" And we'd been married 20 years at that point, and she'd never said anything remotely like that. So I said, "Oh, I have the body of a god?" And she says, "Yes, unfortunately, the god is Buddha." So this is perhaps not the physique to quest after, but I had to admit that my wife sort of had a point here with my Buddha belly. So I decided that I needed to do something about this. So I started exercising. I lost a little weight. I started running a mile every day. And for 5 years, I would run that mile. I got my time down to about 7 minutes. It's not Olympic level, but, not too bad for an older guy. And then one day in the middle of my run, this is where I would start. I live in Pasadena, and I would run this blue route and end up back home. But on this day, October 11th, I got to this point, staggered a couple of steps, and hit the ground unconscious with my heart stopped. This is how much warning you have of heart disease. It's a disease of the insides of your arteries. You can't see it from the outside. There's no nerve endings in there that tell you you're on the verge of death. You think you're fine, and the next moment dead on the street. But I did survive, fortunately. And I started learning some things about heart disease. I found it's the leading killer of men and women in this country. Sometimes heart disease is thought of more of a man's disease than a woman's disease. And at the younger ages, more men die of heart disease than women do. But at older ages, more women die of heart disease than men do. So by the time it's all over, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you live in this country, this is the disease that is most likely to kill you. And the most common form of heart disease is sudden cardiac arrest, where there's no warning. And if this should happen to you outside of a hospital, your survival rate is about 3%. So taking all these three things together, the leading killer, the most common form of it, and a really low survival rate, means that people are dropping dead around us all the time. Wasn't too long ago, Mayor of San Francisco seemed to be okay, and the next moment he's dead of heart disease. But it's not just famous people, it's our neighbors, our family members, our coworkers, the people around us. Probably everyone in this meeting today knows at least one person, perhaps several, that seem to be okay one day, and the next day they're gone of heart disease. So me having sudden cardiac arrest is not unusual at all. It's pretty normal, but surviving is a little unusual. 97% of the people are dead. And that's part of what drives me today to share what I've learned with others, because most people, by the time they find out they have heart disease, they're dead. They have no chance to learn anything, and they don't have any chance to pass on what they've learned. So that's really what drives me. Here's what they saw in my heart the day of my cardiac arrest. Here's the heart muscle. You can't see it real well just yet because the x-rays go right through the muscle tissue. You can see one of my ribs here, another rib down here, spinal column over the side. You can see this catheter. This is a small plastic tube that they inserted into the incision they made inside of my thigh. And they fed it up through the femoral artery around the top of the heart through the aorta, which is relatively large. Then they made a turn into the small coronary artery that feeds blood to the muscle tissue of the heart. The muscle doesn't get its nutrients and its oxygen from the blood that flows through that it's pumping. It has to have its own arteries on the outside that feed it oxygen and nutrients. So just before this video starts, the doctor pushes a foot pedal, which squirts radio opaque dye into the catheter that's sticking out of my leg. And the dye goes through the tube and comes out where the end that you can see it here. So the doctor can see the blood flow through my heart. And this is what he saw. And I want you to, as you look at this, to see if you can tell where my problem was that day. Are you perhaps looking, oops, sorry. Let me try that one more time. If you're looking right there, that would be correct. This artery, this is the left anterior descending coronary artery, sometimes known as the widowmaker, because it's often the one that clogs first. And it appears as though there's no blood getting through this clog, but we know there's some getting through, or else you wouldn't see the dye downstream of it. So there's some getting through, and also I would have been dead if there was nothing getting through. But there's not much getting through, and that was my problem that day. And you will see from the research that I present in just a moment, I eventually was forced to conclude that I did this to myself. And I'm sad to say that the vast majority of Americans are doing this to themselves. Maybe not so much the group of people that are listening today, but the vast majority of Americans are in the process of doing this to themselves. But I did survive. The first day or so in the recovery room was a little awkward. I would wake up from a coma, and I would see my wife there, and I'd say, "Honey, where am I? What happened?" She'd say, "You're in the hospital. You had a heart attack." And I'd say, "Oh, okay." And I'd drift off. A few minutes later, I'd wake up again, and I'd say, "Where am I? What happened?" I had no memory of this conversation from a few minutes before, due to the time when my brain didn't have enough oxygen, when my heart was stopped. They weren't sure that I was going to come back. But after a few days, I could remember the conversations from a few minutes before. And after only 5 days, they sent me home. Yay. They said, "Don't go back to work just yet." So I took another week off from work, but 2 weeks, sorry, from dead on the street to back to work. I thought that wasn't too bad. But of the 3% like me that survived this event, most of them have residual brain damage or residual heart muscle damage, or both. I seem to be okay on the mental side of things, although when I forget my anniversary, I say, "Oh, honey, it was the heart attack." It's a great excuse for those senior moments. But a lot of people have heart muscle damage because the heart muscle didn't get enough oxygen for a while. So they did some more tests and analysis, involved some radioactivity and special imaging system and so on. But the tests showed that I didn't have residual heart muscle damage. Yay. And the doctor said, "You can go back to your life the way it was." And at first I took it exactly the way he meant it, which is this event that has thrown your life into turmoil. It's affected your work, your family, everybody around you. You can just sort of forget about that and go back to the way things were before. But as I thought about this question, my life the way it was, if my life the way it was included the heart attack, I sure didn't want to go back to that. So I started asking some other questions. Was my life the way it was the cause? I didn't have any idea what caused heart disease, but I really wanted to know. And I wanted to know, can it be prevented or reversed? Do I have to go through this again? Eventually, my doctors were not very helpful, but a friend sent me an article in a journal, medical journal, which I read, and that led me to a book called Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Caldwell Esselstyn. And this was really my start down this path of understanding. In this book, Esselstyn says nearly half the people in the US will suffer heart disease. That's a lot. Not all of them will die of it, but half the people, it's a major, major problem. This doctor says, know your cholesterol levels, both total and LDL, and also know what the healthy levels are. Some doctors understand what healthy levels are, some don't. So you need to protect yourself by knowing these numbers. If there's anything you take away from this talk today, I would love it if it were these numbers. Your total cholesterol should be below 150, and your LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, low density lipoprotein cholesterol, should be below 80 milligrams per deciliter. If you're in those ranges and you're taking no medications at all, you can tune me out right now, because there's nothing I can say that will reduce your chances of having a heart attack, because you won't have one. I am sorry to say the vast majority of Americans are above 150 and 80. Some of them a long ways above these numbers. And this doctor says, if your numbers are not below these, fix the problem yourself. Doctors cannot fix this problem. This is a doctor saying that the leading killer in this country cannot be fixed by doctors. These two statements he made are either great news or terrible news, depending on the type of person you are. If you're the type of person who wants to live a carefree life and do whatever you please, and if something goes wrong from a health standpoint, you'll go to the doctor and they'll fix it, this is really bad news, because the leading killer in this country can't be fixed by doctors. But if you're the type of person who wants to take control of your life, you want to decide for yourself whether you're going to be healthy or sick. You want to decide for yourself whether you're going to live a long time or cut your life short. This is great, because you can fix the problem yourself. We'll talk about the fix in a moment, but if you decide you're not going to fix the problem yourself, the medical establishment has lots of things they would like to do to you or have you do to yourself. They'll prescribe medications. They're ineffective and harmful. We'll talk much more about those in just a moment. They'll might want to put in stents. These are metal mesh tubes that they insert through the catheter. They slide them into place and then expand them to mash the debris out of the way. When you have the sort of problem that I had, we do nearly 1 million of these a year, and they don't cure heart disease, because the problem isn't caused by the lack of stent. The next thing the doctors will do is coronary artery bypass graft, CABG, sometimes called cabbage or just bypass surgery. We hear about it all the time. We do 500,000 of those a year, and they don't cure heart disease. We spend 10 billion a year in this country on the statin drugs alone, not million, a billion with a B. And by the time we add these stent surgeries and bypass surgeries, we spend over 50 billion a year on these interventions. This doesn't include lost work and other things, just the medical costs. We spend 50 billion a year on these interventions that don't cure heart disease, but diet can prevent and reverse heart disease. Wow. All right, well, but why is our country the way it is? I believe that a big part of that is that we can't see what's going on. We can't see what happens as a result of our food choices. How can we? Once the food goes past our lips, it's what happens after that is invisible. Well, I have here a little video clip that will help to start to give you an idea of what happens. This doctor, Dr. Clapper, is about to comment on these two blood tests that came from two different patients. After they take the blood out of the patient, they either let it sit for quite a while, or to speed up the separation process, they put it in a centrifuge. And so the different components of the blood separate. And they usually tell patients before they take the blood that don't eat anything for 10 or 12 hours beforehand. And you may not know why they tell you that, but the patient who gave the sample on the left adhered to that guideline. The patient who gave the sample on the right, not so much.
Now, normally, this liquid layer floating on top of the blood clot is quite transparent. It's yellow, but quite clear. You can see right through it. The blood in this patient's tube, however, was anything but clear. The serum floating on his clot was thick and greasy white. It looked like glue. In fact, it stuck to the sides of the blood tube when I shook the tube. I went back to the patient. I said, Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital tonight? He said, yes. I said, what did you have? He said, I had a cheeseburger and a milkshake. And when he said that, I realized that what I was looking at in his tube was all the fat in the beef burger, all the butter fat in the cheese, and the butter fat in the ice cream and in the milkshake.
Now, here's the good news. If at some point in your life you've had a cheeseburger and a milkshake, don't worry too much. Your body is amazing. It clears this stuff away, but it takes 10 or 12 hours. That's why they tell you to not eat anything before the blood test. They want to see your blood the way it's supposed to be, not the way you messed it up based on what you just ate. But for most Americans, before their bodies have had a chance to clear away this junk that they ate, what do? They eat some more of it. So many Americans are eating this stuff such that they're getting this gunky, fatty stuff in their arteries 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Even so, your body is amazing. It does its best to clear this away as best it can for as long as it can. Eventually, though, it catches up to you. For me, it took 52 years before it threw me to the ground. It's hard to say for each individual how long it will take. But let's look at this gentleman who gave this blood test and see what he looks like inside. Now, we don't know for sure that he ate cheeseburgers and drank milkshakes all the time, but we might guess that was sort of normal in his diet. So after decades of that, what does he look like inside?
The next morning, we took Mr. Phillips to the operating room, and I put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest. And from these arteries, he began pulling out yellow, greasy deposits of fatty material called atherosclerosis.
So I'd like you to think of this image right here the next time you're tempted to eat a cheeseburger or drink a milkshake. This is the kind of stuff that you're building up inside of you. You also need to know that this roto-rooter job, this plumbing job that this guy got, didn't help him. In fact, the yellow material that you see being pulled out doesn't form on the inside wall of the artery. It forms just inside, past that first endothelium layer of cells, such that in order to pull out this yellow string of stuff, you're also pulling out the inner lining of the guy's artery, which is really necessary for its proper function. So this actually makes him less healthy. So they don't actually do that. But I thought the video clip was good inspiration for us to keep in mind. This is what happens when you eat the wrong stuff. Just a few words about the cholesterol blood tests. Cholesterol in the blood at the moment is not what causes death. And in fact, cholesterol is a natural substance. Your liver produces it, your body needs it, certain kind and certain quantity, and your liver generally produces about what you need. So some cholesterol in your blood is natural and normal. But then you add to that the cholesterol from the animal products you eat. No plant product whatsoever has cholesterol in it. Most, not all, but most animal products do. So when you're measuring the cholesterol in your blood, you're measuring the sum of what got there from your liver, which is supposed to be there, and the stuff that would be much better that weren't there that you got by eating animal products. Even so, the level at the moment is not what causes death. It's that level over a long period of time that does the damage. But it is a good indicator of likelihood of death. I mean, if you're eating such that your cholesterol is elevated today, you probably ate the same thing yesterday and last week, last month, and will in the future as well, unless something changes. So it is a pretty good indicator of likelihood of death. The Framingham Heart Study established the correlation of high cholesterol blood tests with heart attacks and death. So what that means is you can go ahead and get this test, and it's a pretty good, it'll tell you whether you're not going to have a heart attack at all, you have some small chance, or you're really at risk and you better go to the emergency room right away. So a pretty good test under most conditions. There's a big exception though, which has to do with medication, and we'll get to that in a bit. But if you're not taking any medication, this blood test is pretty good at telling you what your risk level is. The American Heart Association gives a guideline of total cholesterol of 200. This is interesting. I'm served by Kaiser Permanente, and when I get a blood test, a lipid blood test, it comes back and it says, your cholesterol, total cholesterol is this number, and the standard is 200. So you can compare to tell whether you're in good shape or not. Well, but the research shows that it really should be 150 to be healthy. So I went to the Kaiser and I said, where does this 200 come from? They said, well, it comes from the American Heart Association. So I contacted the American Heart Association and said, where does this number come from? They said, well, it's roughly the average of all Americans. Oh, wait a minute. It's an average among a group of people whose leading cause of death is heart disease. You don't want to be average. You want to be healthy, and 200 is not healthy. So don't believe that that's okay. The Framingham Heart Study, in fact, found that a third of the people with heart disease had cholesterol between 150 and 200. So if you're a little under 200, that's certainly better than being above 200. You'd rather be in the 1/3 instead of the 2/3. But I think you'd rather be in the 0% chance of having a heart attack. I'm a great example of this. My last blood test before my cardiac arrest was at my total cholesterol was 188. So if you or your doctor thinks that just being under 200 is safe, I beg to differ. The June 2010 study came out, and it showed that the statin drugs break the correlation between the blood test measurement and your likelihood of death. What does this mean? It means the cholesterol blood test goes down, making you think you're healthy, but you still die nearly as often. Let me draw an analogy for you. If you're driving your car and the red check engine light comes on, you know that the red light itself is not the problem. It's an indicator that there's a problem somewhere else deep inside your engine, but you know it's serious, and so you better get it taken care of. You go to the mechanic and it comes back the next day and the check engine light is off, and you think, great, the mechanic fixed the problem. But then if you happen to look behind the dashboard and you found the wires going to the red light and they look like this, you might conclude that, in fact, the mechanic didn't fix the problem. He just disabled the indicator so you no longer knew there was a problem. And I think you'd be pretty angry at your mechanic in that situation. Same with these statin drugs. Don't let the statin drugs fool you into thinking you're healthy. Well, what are these drugs doing? The statin drugs inhibit the liver's natural production of cholesterol. They don't do anything about the cholesterol that's in your body from the animal products that you ate. So let's see here. These drugs, some people are referring to them as liver poisons. They're toxins that screw up your liver's natural function that your doctor has convinced you to take. And they do result in a lower blood test, because the blood test is some of what comes from your liver and what comes from the animal products you ate. So yeah, you can still keep eating animal products and your cholesterol level goes down because you're poisoning your liver. But I wouldn't recommend that approach. I was on that for a year before I found enough research to suggest to me that I get off of those quickly. So what do these drugs do? By the way, statin drugs, the trade names for those are Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor. I hope none of you are on them. The generic names are Simvastatin, Atorvastatin. If you're on any of those, look into it, contact me, look at the research, and you might want to consider getting off of those. What do? They cause liver problems. When I was taking these drugs right after my heart attack, in the fine print, it said, if you take this medication for any length of time, you should get your standard liver test. And if the liver test shows damage, you should discontinue this medication. Well, after a while, they no longer put that warning along with these medications. Why? Because they found that the standard liver test doesn't find the damage caused by the statin drugs. The standard liver test is designed for something else, primarily alcohol-related liver damage. So it just doesn't, it's not reliable in telling you whether your liver is being damaged or not. Statin drugs also cause muscle soreness. This tends to vary quite a bit from person to person. And finally, brain damage. Let me expand on that a little bit. Those of you who know about Alzheimer's know that it's a progressive disease that currently we have no way of reversing. There are some treatments that maybe can slow it down, but nothing can really back it off. And the only way that they really know that you have Alzheimer's is after you die, they can do an autopsy and look in the brain and see a particular type of degradation caused by Alzheimer's. But before you're dead, if you have a set of symptoms that include short-term memory loss, cognition problems, concentration issues, a doctor may do a tentative diagnosis of Alzheimer's. But they're finding more and more that people that are on these statin drugs are having these symptoms, and when they take them off the statin drugs, they get better, which means it can't have been Alzheimer's. It was caused by these medications. And this is the scariest thing for me. I think everybody in this meeting is really incredibly smart, and you can probably spare a few brain cells to die and you're still fine, but I'm not that smart. I need all of my brain cells. So this is the scariest thing for me. Now, as I found my way into medical research journals, going to medical conferences, talking to the experts, I eventually found some really interesting studies. And after a while, it occurred to me that I could put all of these on one slide to show graphically a comparison of 5 different approaches to deal with heart disease. And I want you to understand this isn't one big study comparing 5 things. It's 5 different studies that all compare a particular treatment to a baseline of untreated patients. So the first one of these is stents. These are these metal mesh tubes that they jam into the diseased artery to push the debris out of the way. The Duke University for years had patients coming in that were candidates for stents. They decided that they would do this study where they'd take half the patients arbitrarily and give them a stent, and half they wouldn't get the stent. And they'd measure the lifetimes and deaths of both sides. And eventually they got enough data that they published the results. And I got out of this paper 2 numbers. What's the death rate per patient for the group who didn't get the stents? And I scaled that to be 100% on this chart. I applied the same visual scaling to the number, which is the death rate per patient of the group that got the stents, and here it is. If stents were highly effective treatment, we expect this red bar to be much lower. It's at 97%. What does that mean? It means that 97% of the patients that would die without the stents, even when they get the stents, they still die. This is a highly, highly ineffective treatment for heart disease. Well, what about these statin drugs, Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor, those kind of things? how effective are they at lowering the blood test measurement? Very good. They really do drive down the blood test measurement compared to a similar group that doesn't get the drugs. Do we care about the blood test measurement? No, we care about it only if it's an indicator of our likelihood of death. Well, let's look directly at the death rate then. This next red bar comes from this June 2010 study I mentioned a few minutes ago that actually looks at the death rate. And so they took 65,000 people that were all having high cholesterol at risk for heart disease, gave half of them statin drugs, half of them didn't get the statin drugs. I took the death rates for the two groups. One scaled to 100%, the other scaled with the same scaling, and it comes out to be about 91%. Now, I can't say that statins provide no benefit. The benefit that they provide is this little bit of white above the red bar, which is about 9%. But I can say that 91% of the people who would die without the statin drugs still die. Not a very effective treatment. What really annoys me about this treatment is that the doctors don't tell you the statistics and how terrible they are, and they sort of hold them out as this is the cure. And so it doesn't cause you to perhaps look further and look at alternatives. Well, let's look at two more studies. This next one came from UK, where they looked at what people ate. And people in UK eat pretty much like Americans do, Western diet. And like here in this country, a small percentage of people in UK just are vegetarians. That means they don't eat meat. They may still eat animal products, including dairy and eggs, that you'd still be a vegetarian, but they just cut meat out of their diet. And the study looked at what is the death rate due to heart disease for the group who ate the standard Western diet. I scaled that to 100%, same scaling for the vegetarians. And the death rate is here, about 65%. Now you look at that and you say, there's still a lot of red. Vegetarians are still dying of heart disease. But if you look not at the height of the red bar, but the white above it, you would say, this treatment is 3 times more effective than the best medication that we have. So a doctor, if you go to the doctor with high cholesterol, they should say, well, we can give you this medication, it's not very good. Or you can just cut meat out of your diet and it's 3 times better. What do you want to do? Some doctors may be saying that, not nearly enough. But wait, there's another study that I need to tell you about. This is one that involves an ideal diet. I'll say in a moment exactly what that is. But this came from Caldwell Esselstyn. I mentioned this book before. He does an early study that he talks about in that book. I found it just fascinating. But that involved 18 patients, and he was criticized for saying, well, you can't infer from 18 patients that this will work in the population at large. Well, mathematically, statistically, absolutely you can. But still, to counter those criticisms, he got together with some other people. They raised a bunch of money because these studies are expensive. They enrolled 200 patients. Each of those patients were high-risk heart disease patients. He brought each of them into his office individually and said, you really need to eat this set of stuff and avoid eating this other set of stuff. And if you do, this will have a huge impact on your heart disease. And 90% of them said, yep, doc, I'm in. I'm absolutely going to do this. The other 10% said, no, you're asking me to give up foods that I'm just not willing to give up. I'm going to continue to eat the way I have been. Doctor said, that's okay, but stay in the research group. So they tracked both groups of patients for years, and then eventually they published the data. In this case, they tracked not only the deaths due to heart disease, but 4 other cardiac events as well, which is bypass surgeries, a stent emplacements, a heart attack that didn't result in death, and angina, which is just severe chest pain. So they published in their paper the cardiac event rate per person for the group that didn't change their diet, and I scaled that to be 100%. I applied the same scaling to the heart cardiac event rate for the group who had the ideal diet. And I'm going to show you the height of that red bar in just a moment. But before I show that to you, I want each of you to think, how low does that red bar need to go before it's important to you? I think you'll all agree that it has to go below the vegetarian bar. If it turns out the ideal diet is higher, well, we won't do that. We'll do the vegetarian thing. So it needs to go lower, but how low before it's important to you? Ready to see that red bar? Here it is. 1% or less. 99% of the leading killer just goes away if you eat the right foods and avoid eating the wrong foods. Wow. Okay, so if you eat properly, you don't have heart disease. That's what this shows. The converse of that is if you have heart disease, you're not eating properly. That means if you have heart disease, it's your fault. This is a study that forced me to conclude that restricted artery that you saw in my heart earlier on, that was my fault. Here's some pictures out of that same book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Here's another gentleman who had a problem with his left anterior descending coronary artery. This was the same artery that got me. But you remember I had just one sort of clogged place. This guy's got this whole section here that was clogged. So they really couldn't put a stent in it. The only thing they could do is send him down the hall to this wacky doctor who's telling him to change his diet, which he did. And 2.5 years later, they had an opportunity to look at this artery again. And look at that. Your body has an amazing ability to cure itself from a very diseased state to a healthy state if you just quit abusing it 3 times a day with the meals that you eat. Amazing. And you can see the dates on this. This has been known for quite a while. This is not new news. Well, okay, so what is the horrible stuff? Red meat, everybody knows that. But what you may not know is that pork, chicken, and fish are also bad. And I'll say a few more words about fish in just a moment. It's got a special problem. And what is damaging about these? Animal protein is really harmful to us throughout our bodies. In particular, it's inflammatory, inflames the inside of your arteries, which allows then the cholesterol, the animal fat, to get in where the damaged arteries are and get in behind there and start causing troubles. So animal protein is harmful to us. Animal fat is harmful to us. Animal fat and animal protein together are the perfect storm to ravage us top to bottom. It's not only these meats that are a problem, but dairy, because of course it's got animal protein and animal fat. We're talking about milk, butter, ice cream, cheese, especially adding carcinogenic effects of dairy products. Some experts say cheese is the most damaging substance on the planet. Eggs are also a problem for the same reason. And then there's a set of processed foods that are damaging to us as well. I put a donut there as a placeholder, but there's lots of stuff that has oil and sugar and other nasty things. And then there's another thing that's really bad for us, which is oil. And it doesn't really matter what type of oil, whether it's corn oil or rice oil or olive oil, it's damaging to us. That's a surprise to many. Now, I'm not saying that you should never eat these things, but I'm saying that science is very, very clear. If you continue to eat these things on a regular basis, and by the way, oil is in almost tons of products so you want to avoid all those. But if you do eat these things on a regular basis, the most likely outcome is heart disease and you in the casket before your time. Your call. Or you could instead decide to eat colorful vegetables of all kinds, heavy emphasis on leafy greens, fruits in moderation. Beans are awesome. Whole grains, including corn, oatmeal, brown rice. White rice is okay, brown is better. Whole wheat, not that processed white stuff. Potatoes are awesome nutritionally. The problem with potatoes in this country and throughout the world, you take a healthy potato and you fry it cut it in slices and fry it in oil, you've just made it unhealthy. Or you take this wonderful healthy baked potato and you slather on some butter or cheese or sour cream, you've just made it unhealthy. But the potato itself is great. Sweet potatoes are perhaps even better. There are societies on this planet that eat nothing but sweet potatoes, and they don't have any heart disease. They don't have any cancer. I'm not saying that you should only eat these things, but I'm saying the science is really, really clear. If you choose to eat only these things, the most likely outcome for you is living a lot longer. The studies, depending on which ones you look at, suggest 14 to 20 more years. So that might be enough to not only see your kids grow up, but your grandkids. And the closest you'll come to the graveyard in your old age is when you run through it, exercising, and you see the gravestones of the people who ate the stuff on the previous slide. Now, what may be more important to you than those extra years is the quality of those years. In this country, the average number of years of disability before death is about 9. And the things that cause a disability are the same diseases that don't happen if you eat this plant-based diet. So you can have 9 years that really suck, and then you die. Or you can have 9 vibrant, healthy years, followed by 14 to 20 more healthy, vibrant years, your choice, based on what you choose to eat. Now, the researchers usually call this diet a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet. They tend to not use the word vegan because there are some vegan foods that are kind of unhealthy. But it absolutely is vegan because there's no animal products in it. This diet consists of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes, no meat or fish, no eggs or dairy products, no oils, including olive oil, no processed food. And then the low fat part comes in here. You really would like less than 10% of your calories from fat. The standard American diet is about 35% of the calories are from fat. But by the time you've gotten rid of the meat, eggs, and oils, most of that is gone. So you don't have to count calories and count fat calories. But there are a few plant products that are high fat that you really need to have some caution with. And that's nuts and seeds, coconut, and avocados. Now, if you're totally healthy in every way, you can safely have a little bit of nuts, coconut, and avocados. That's what the asterisk means. And notice this is a guideline in gray. It's not quite as strong as the ones in black. What this means is if you have a body mass index puts you in the normal range, your blood pressure is below 120/80 with no blood pressure medications, your cholesterol's under 150 and LDL's under 80 with no medications. If all those apply to you, you can safely have some slivered almonds on your salad. It doesn't mean that you can open a 16-ounce jar of Planters peanuts and eat it all in one go. That's not okay for anybody. You can have a little bit of coconut shavings in your entree or your dessert, but it doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to avoid ice cream, so I'll go get that non-dairy frozen dessert, which is made almost all of coconut oil, which is 90% saturated fat. Now, that's not okay for anybody. If you're totally healthy, a few slices of avocado on your salad are great. It doesn't mean, oh, I'll make a quart of guacamole and I'll eat it all in one go. That's a huge load of fat, not healthy for anybody. You also want to be cautious with soy and fruit juice. Soy in its whole form is fine. That is tofu, tempeh, edamame, those are all fine. But there's a lot of vegan fake meats that are made from isolated soy protein. So they take out the fat, they take out the carbohydrates, leaving soy protein. Not so healthy, better than animal meat, but not so healthy. And be cautious with fruit juice. It can cause a spike in your blood sugar, which can cause a spike in your insulin, which causes some liver problems. So a little bit of fruit juice, but if you're going to replace your 40-ounce big gulp of Coca-Cola with 40 ounces of fruit juice and drink that several times a day, not so healthy. Here's Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. This is a quote from him. And he's responding to the idea that this low-fat plant-based diet is extreme. He says some people think that whole food plant-based diet is extreme, but 500,000 people a year will have their chests opened up and a vein taken from their leg and sewn onto their coronary artery. Some people would call that extreme. So if you're thinking about this and still wondering if you should eat that meat, think about that buzz saw going up your chest to cut you open so that they can do open heart surgery on you. And by the way, you'll never be the same again. That chest doesn't quite heal up after they sew it open or saw it open. So, when you consider that buzz saw, maybe you'd say, swapping out my beef for broccoli, maybe that isn't so extreme. Here's another expert, Colin Campbell. He says, casein, the main protein of cow's milk, is the most relevant chemical carcinogen ever identified. Carcinogen means cancer causing. So if you want to cause cancer, have some cow's milk or cheese or any of the other products made from it. Wow. Interesting. Here's some data that they've looked at that shows that not only for cancer, but cow's milk is a problem for type 1 diabetes. So the countries that eat have more cow's milk consumption, which is this horizontal axis, have more incidence of type 1 diabetes, which is on the vertical axis. So you really don't want to drink cow's milk, and especially kids, where you can establish the type 1 diabetes early on in a kid's life. Should not be drinking cow's milk. Type 2 diabetes is the more common diabetes, and people think it's caused by eating carbohydrates. It's not. It's caused by eating fat. And the fat in the muscle cells interferes with their ability to take in the glucose, the blood sugar, which is supposed to be in your blood. And this results in progressive disease that often results in amputations, blindness, and a painful death. Here's a picture of a gentleman who had a diabetic gangrene in his heel, and shortly after this picture was taken, they amputated his foot. Now you can go to the American Diabetes Association and ask them what you should eat, and they have a diet, and it helps a little bit. But the studies show that the ideal diet that we've already talked about is 3 times better. And that 3 times better is usually enough for a cure, where the ADA diet maybe isn't. And the cure usually occurs within 2 to 4 weeks. Wow. This epidemic of type 2 diabetes in this country, just cure it within 2 to 4 weeks. Here's a doctor from Northern California, Dean Ornish, who's been curing people of heart disease and diabetes for some 30 or more years. He says, think about it. Heart disease and diabetes are completely preventable by making comprehensive lifestyle changes without drugs or surgery. The same diet is also good for hypertension, which is high blood pressure. It's caused by the same problem that caused the heart disease. Your heart has to respond by pumping harder, it wears out. Medication lowers the blood pressure, but doesn't solve the root problem, which is the artery problem caused by your diet. But diet solves it, and quickly too. And you need to be careful, because sometimes within 3 or 4 days of going on a healthy diet, you can start to lower your blood pressure. And if you continue to take the meds that also lower your blood pressure, you can make your blood pressure too low. So be careful about that. By all means, get rid of your high blood pressure, but be ready to taper off your medications. The Center for Disease Control publishes their list of top 15 killers. I took those killers and put them into a pie chart, and then looked at, well, which of these are caused by diet? Well, essentially all of heart disease is. Most cancer, not all, a lot of that, almost all stroke, type 2 diabetes deaths go away, and blood pressure deaths as well. Sorry, accidents, suicides, and murders are not highly affected by diet, so there's still some deaths remaining. If we add up all the deaths that are caused by our diet and those that aren't, we end up with about 2/3 of the deaths in this country are caused by our food choices. That's about 2 million Americans die needlessly every year because of the food that they've chosen to eat. Looked at another way, think of yourself and two other people you love the most. If the three of you insist on eating the standard American diet, statistically, 2 out of the 3 of you are going to die needlessly. Please don't. The right diet can prevent or reverse a whole host of diseases. And the great news is it's the same diet. It's like every time I go to a medical conference, I come back with, there's another 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 diseases that just go away if you eat the same diet. It is amazing. Let me tell you just a little bit about toxins in your food. There's a concept called biomagnification. If you imagine a little patch of grass and it has a little bit of toxin in it, and I'll show that graphically by this little black dot right there. And along comes the cow and eats it that day. And the next day, the cow eats another one, another one, another one. And the thing that makes a toxin toxic is our body's inability to get rid of it. So as this cow continues to live, these toxins build up in its body. And by the time it gets to you in the form of meat or dairy, the toxins have built up to 100 to 1,000 times the levels that they are in the cow's diet. So it might have been small enough to not completely harm the cow. It can be well high enough to really harm you. In the ocean, it's a similar situation. There's a little bit of toxin that's in the ocean, gets taken up by the green plants in the ocean. Along come the little krill or the little fish, and they eat the green plants. And by the time they're mature, they've built up 100 to 1,000 times the toxins in their body. And then along come the bigger fish, like the salmon or the tuna, and they eat these little fish that have toxins at an elevated level. And the salmon or the tuna elevate that toxin another 100 to 1,000 times in their bodies. So by the time it gets to you and your plate, there's so much toxins that it's 10,000 to 1,000,000 times the toxins that was in the green plant in the sea. I can't even show it to you all in the slide unless I shrink it like this to show you all the toxins. That's mid-range, by the way. The higher end of that range is like this. And oh, by the way, this might not be high enough. This is 1,000,000 times. I found a study that showed that some samples they've taken of salmon showed not 1,000,000 times the toxin level, but 9,000,000 times the toxin level. So to show you that, I'd have to do this. So it's not a question as to whether you get toxins in your fish. The question is, will you get a little bit of fish along with this huge load of toxins? And it can get even worse than that. I found a report that showed that about 1/3 of the fish caught are not going to feed humans, they're going to feed livestock. So you take this highly toxic stuff and you feed it to the cows, pigs, and chickens, where it magnifies even more, and then we eat it. How do we avoid all this stuff? Just don't eat any animal products. So what are steps to long life and health that I recommend? Learn everything you can. You need to be smarter than your doctor. They don't teach this stuff in medical school, sadly. Make a change to a better diet. There will be challenges associated with that, but you can overcome them. And then at some point, help others through these 3 steps. Here's some things that I've been doing to try to help people. I created this nonprofit organization called the Nutrition Science Foundation. And the website is there, nusci.org. I put a number of resources and information there on that website, including some recipes, a doctor directory for the few doctors that really understand this stuff, and some success stories for inspiration, both some written ones and some videos. And if you'd like to help us spread the word, we'd love a donation. So 2 possible action plans for you if you're ready to go on a more healthy diet, and I know many of you already are on that diet. But if you're not and ready to go, read one of the recommended books that I recommend on the website, nusci.org. Take your medical measurements before you go very far. Do a trial of finding the foods that you really like that are healthy. And if you're cooking them, find the ones that you are fine with cooking. Once you know what you can eat and be happy eating, go all in for 90 days. If you can't do 90, do 60. If you can't do 60, do 30, but eat only plants, and then take your measurements again. And if you find your cholesterol's down, your blood pressure's down, your blood sugar's down, your energy is up, then you really like the food anyway, you might decide that you can stay on this plan for the rest of your life, and that would be great. And at some point, help others through this process. Another possible strategy, I started a healthy food company called Little Green Forks. We deliver throughout the 48 states. Of course, this food is all whole plant, no oil, fresh greens and fruits, all kinds of comfort food and gourmet foods. And we're doing a special now for a 30-day program. This is not for people who are already eating this way, but for people who are majorly sick and they need to quickly get away from their heart disease and diabetes. We have a special 30-day program where we can get some discounts on this food if they agree to eat only this food for 30 days. Here are some of my favorite dishes. This is what I eat almost every day. Burgers, sweet potato bowl, salads, soups, pad thai. We have a lot of cultural dishes as well as American favorites. Here's a dessert. It's tastes like pumpkin pie. It's made with sweet potatoes, bananas, and pumpkin pie spice. Love it. So this is the way I was back in 2001. This is my weight and my numbers. Here I am in 2023. Here's my numbers. Weight's down. Glucose is well, no longer pre-diabetic. My cholesterol's well below the 150 number. My LDL's well below 62. And the thing I love maybe most about this, I found my shorts that I from all those years ago, and notice how long the belt is right here, as opposed to where it was then. So I'm my vanity says I do appreciate the diet that I'm on now, as well as the numbers. If you'd like to order Little Green Forks, there's a coupon code that we've created. It's called VCOP, VOGO. So if you use this coupon code when you check out with your first order, you get $15 off an order of $30 or more. I'm representing today both the Nutrition Science Foundation and Little Green Forks. Do we have time for a question or two?
Wow. John, such a thorough presentation. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Might I say it's typical? I would expect that from a good engineer.
Spoken like a fellow engineer.
Yes. Any questions for John?
Hi, I'm BJ.
Hi.
I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, go ahead, BJ.
I'm just so moved by your talk, and of course some of it I've known, but I'm moved also because I got a call today from a friend that passed away, who was a meat eater and overweight, and I've just shared your video to some other people that I love, and so thank you so much for sharing it. I'm so glad you made it through.
Thank you. And I'm going to share with you a little personal detail. People sometimes ask, why do I share this message? Well, part of it is I do love to hear that people come back to me and say, you know, my life got so much better based on what I learned. But what really drives me is the failures. I've had friends, close friends, who died of heart disease because I couldn't convince them to change. And you know, you can only push so hard with your friends, but it's the failures that sometimes drive us to try to do more.
Thank you.
Thank you, BJ. Watch.
Oh, hi. Thank you, John. Great presentation. My question is, how do we get the medical community to embrace this? You know, they're not going to make any money if you are ruining their bypass surgery or the cabbage or the triple bypass. How do we make inroads into the medical community to adopt food as medicine while not giving an indication that we're there to destroy their whole business model?
That is such an excellent question, and there is no simple answer to that. Yeah, the experts like Campbell have estimated that 75% of all of her medical costs would go away if we all ate this plant-based diet. Well, that means 75% of the doctors are unemployed, 75% of the hospitals are out of business. And that is scary for people that are in that business. And so, yeah, how do you, on the other hand, most doctors got into being a doctor because they want to help others. And more of them are getting disillusioned because they prescribe the medications and they send them down the hall to the surgeon and they don't get better. And so there is a growing group of doctors that are trying to make this change. I showed the clip of Michael Clapper with the 2 blood samples. He's retired from active practice to spend the rest of his days trying to get this information into medical schools. So it's happening way too slow, but I think it is happening.
The whole lifestyle medicine movement is incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
If there's not going to be any more questions, I can expand on this.
Yeah.
I started an organization called Tanner Care Health and Wellness Center, where we do programs that are 25 hours or 75 hours for a whole year. We take patients through this process, and most of it is psychological. You know, in the first few days, you can teach them what to eat, what not to eat, but how do we actually change our minds so that we don't eat that stuff? And we had pretty significant success with this program, but we had a hard time getting anybody to pay for it. You know, the insurance companies don't want to pay for it. Medicare doesn't want to pay for it. The patients themselves, they expect their insurance to pay for it. They don't want to pay for it. I've spent a fair amount of time looking for who benefits financially if people are healthy. And I haven't found them yet. You know, the doctors don't benefit, the insurance agents don't benefit, the hospitals don't benefit. Yes, the people benefit, but you know, they're not the ones paying the bills typically. So
how about Kaiser? Wouldn't Kaiser benefit?
You would think so. I gave a talk maybe 10 years ago to a group of Kaiser doctors, and they said, wait a minute, you're telling me that if you switch to this diet, the patients are cured of type 2 diabetes? Yes. That you're not just treating their symptoms, but the disease goes away? Yes. And I thought the financial model for Kaiser was you pay your premium and then they cover all of your costs. Well, sorry, they're tied into Medicare, and Medicare provides money to them, a certain amount, for care of a diabetic patient. If you make the patient so they're no longer diabetic, that money flow comes to an end. And they pointed that out. And, you know, it's better for them to treat the symptoms and keep the patient sick, financially better for them. Sorry about that.
It's so systemic, isn't it?
It is so sad.
Nancy? And then we can close it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was brilliant and really powerful. And I can't wait to send it to everybody I know who may or may not receive it well. I was wondering if you were aware of the role of John D. Rockefeller Sr. and the role of petrochemicals in making pharmaceuticals and his profit motive in pushing drugs and totally destroying all the other methods of medical care, from homeopathy and herbology and massage and nutrition, etc. And connected to that, the Flexner report by Abraham Flexner, in which he went around the country and went to all the medical schools and tried to see what they were doing And then John D. Rockefeller, through his money and his contacts, his cousin in the Congress, and his pulling ads from any magazine or any publication that in any way promoted anything but drugs, and his owning of 2 out of 3 of the major insurance companies. And they just smashed all these other forms. Homeopathy colleges, some survived, not many, but it was this 1910 Flexner report that really made it so that if you weren't number one cure, drugs, number 2 drugs, if you weren't about that, you were really, the money was withdrawn, and almost all the colleges were closed. And now you're a crack, I'm sorry, you're a quack. You're crack too, but you're a quack if you do anything but drugs. And even anyone who opposes vaccinations or promotes the movie Vaxxed, VAXXED, or has any kind of alternative approach, is ostracized. And some, like Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who was in the movie Vax, he lost his license. And a lot of these people do lose their license, and sometimes even worse. So just wanted to put that forward as something that I think, people ask, well, what can we do with the doctors? Well, they're trained, Merck Medical, the manual they got into the whole curriculum. They prepared the curriculum, and that's all you're supposed to do. So the doctors, it's not like they don't have a choice, but they are trained from the get-go. It's the slash, burn, and poison technique, slash, surgery, burn, radiation, and poison, chemotherapy, or, these statin drugs, etc. So it's a whole combination of things now that's really, but there's light. A lot of people are exposing the influence of the drug companies. And so I just want to put that forth so that we all are aware of power of money, as opposed to what we have, which is much more powerful, and that's the power of truth and love and peace and justice. Thank you so much for your talk.
Nancy, thanks for those words. I was not aware of the history. It doesn't surprise me at all. And I do understand the current nature of medical schools. One of the things I've heard is medical schools cost a lot to run. And even though admission fees are high for the students, they don't cover the costs. So how is a medical school supposed to cover their costs? Well, they've got a steady line of pharmaceutical companies and medical device manufacturers. They'll be happy to kick in some money. But then when those companies come up with a new product and they come to the medical school and say, we'd like our person to give a lecture to these upcoming doctors, medical school isn't going to say no. They're dependent on that money. So yeah, it's a problem, but I love to hear that, we're starting to make some headway against that, and exposing the connections, I think, is a good start there. Thank you, Nancy.